Hello and welcome to the BIC, the Berkshire Innovation Center. Come on in. My name is Greg Cybulski. I'm going to be the moderator of the panel this evening. Just for some background, I'm not a local person. I've been here for 25 years now, but I'm a native Rhode Islander and also grew up outside of Houston, Texas. So really just as adept as raking little necks as I am running through dusty fields full of pump jacks, pulling oil out of the ground. I'm a degreed environmental scientist. I went to the University of Rhode Island. I came up to the Berkshires in 1996, working for a centrifuge company, so a mechanical engineering company. I left that business and started another company in Foxborough, also a high technology centrifuge company, through some investment support. And that business continues, but there were some philosophical differences that led to my departure. I ended up coming back here. That was about an 8 or 10 year venture. I never moved out of the Berkshires, so I did a lot of traveling just to Foxborough and back during the week, and bunch of other overseas travel and stuff like that. I ended up coming back to work for the company that I work for now, which is called Rousselet-Robitel, which is, again, a French centrifuge manufacturing company. We're also a member of the BIC community. If anyone is familiar with this building upstairs, there's a wet lab and there's a bunch of equipment in that wet lab. And that's where we run a bunch of our sort of development processes for our customers. Yes, since I moved up here in 1996, I've absolutely loved this area and the outdoor natural resources that it provides. Just a couple of practical points before we get going. We have honestly a great lineup of panelists here this evening. Each is going to be speaking for 6, 8, or 10 minutes on a topic that is near and dear to their hearts, I presume. We will take questions from the attendees, but we're going to do that after the panelists finish. And the way that we do that, there's a microphone over there. So if you do have a question, just put your hand up and make your way over to the microphone and ask the question of the panelists. So, excuse me, with that said, this big facility is a really great spot. I did open the door. I don't know if anybody went outside or not, but between the BIC and the city of Pittsfield is Silver Lake. And many of you are familiar with the, let's say, colorful history of Silver Lake, right? It's I'm going to say it's a 40 or 50 acre water body, and it's fed mostly by runoff, mainly from this area. Historically, this area now I think is considered William Stanley Business Park, or generally that's the area here. Prior to the concrete slabs that you see kind of populating the fields around here, throughout the 1900s, this area was occupied by really large buildings and with grand manufacturing processes going on. The city was doing a lot of good. These buildings went up with the support of corporate investment. There was a lot of opportunity in Pittsfield, for sure. The economy was doing well. Jobs were plentiful. Families were happy, and communities were growing, right? All of those metrics that you would want to see in a developing populace. One of the consequences, however, of that economic development, particularly in the context of manufacturing processes, complex manufacturing processes, was unchecked pollution. Which we now know, and we've known for quite a while, occurred as a certainty, right? To give you an example of that, come on in, folks, wherever you want to sit. To give an example of that, it was exactly 100 years ago that Silver Lake was on fire. There was so much pollution, excuse me, that the water was burning. Not the water, obviously, the pollutants on top of the water. But it's an incredible sight to see. Again, growing up in Texas, you could see oil burning on, not a surprise, but an inland pond like that, forget it, right? That's really, really scary. Fast forward 75 years, right, to when I moved up here. The lake was no longer burning, of course, but it wouldn't freeze either. Even in the harshest depths of Berkshire winters, that lake would not freeze. And I'd say that story is symbolic of many of the situations that are facing the freshwater lakes and watersheds of Berkshire County today. There's no doubt with those, we have a bunch of challenges, and that's what a number of people here are really fighting to improve. And honestly, that's why I worked alongside my colleagues here to pull this conference together, pull this community together, to try to really highlight some of the good that's being done in the community, and to look to really hang our hat on some of the successes instead of the shortcomings. So we can agree today that there's a lot of divisive issues that face us as citizens, locally and nationally. But for me, there's too much rancor, too much negative rhetoric, and all too often it is the failures that end up getting noticed and carry a lot of the weight. So today, really, by bringing this together, we're here to try to turn the table on that line of thinking, really to recognize the positive outcomes and the successes that are produced by working together to solve these challenges. So really, for me, it's about talking about keeping your foot on the accelerator and pushing forward to really achieve something meaningful. Not sure if you know or not, but in the winter of 2022-2023, Silver Lake became a regular destination for a group of ice skaters. The lake freezes over to the point where it's a recreational value for some people, right? So that didn't occur overnight. That was a 14 or 16-year cleanup effort. There are still runoff issues. The lake's still monitored. Yep, all of those things still have to occur. But that accomplishment of having that ice skating club get on there wouldn't have happened without having people really contribute and put some energy into solving that problem. So again, I'd just like to acknowledge that that's one of the great examples that can be achieved. Last evening, just to change topics quickly, and I won't go on for too long, I had the opportunity to watch the sunset over Lake Onota. Coming off of the end of the longest day, it took forever for the sun to go down, right? And we're staring at it. And as the sun was going down, you can see it up there, the light began to change. You could tell I'm passionate about it. The light began to change. It was like you're on a movie set. Really. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but in fact, we were at a movie set. Anybody know that? There's a major motion picture being filmed? Yeah. So, yeah. Correct. So, yes, it is Michael Douglas. It's the guy from the streets of San Francisco. It's the guy from Wall Street, Romancing the Stone, all that kind of stuff, right? So they're filming their a feel-good movie. And it's a movie about a father and a son who have had some difficulties early in their life, but they're coming back together and they're trying to reconcile. So you try to envision the father and a son sitting on a rowboat in the middle of a tranquil lake. It's clear that there's palpable tension between the two. Different ages, coming from different places. They have different goals in mind, where their future is going to take them. But they're in a rowboat, and they know they need to get to shore. So even though they've got some differences in their life, they also have something common that they know they need to work towards. They need to get to shore. got to get the paddles in the water. You got to get moving in the same direction. So as it is in life, sometimes the common goals that we have don't really become apparent until we're sitting in a boat together. That's kind of what this is intended to be. Okay. We have many groups, individuals, organizations within our community that have their own objectives and oftentimes have their own ways of going about trying to achieve those objectives. And underscore that we're all really trying to do the right thing, right? But when we're in that mode, and I'm also often in that mode, we focus too much on what's important to ourselves and kind of paddle haphazardly in a direction. It's not until we come together, we sit and face one another, and you've heard me say that a few times here, different people, to where you sit and face one another, you begin to recognize that there are a number of common threads that we have. And really, instead of paddling independently, my objective is to together put our proverbial oars in the water and start paddling in the same direction. With that, just leave a question to you. What would happen if we were able to do that, all paddle in the same direction? Our first speaker tonight, Lee Hauge. I'd like to introduce, we'll be talking about waters that unite us both literally and figuratively. Lee's a longtime director of LAPA West, the Lakes and Ponds Association of Western Massachusetts. He's worked quite tirelessly in support of the health and sustainability of the lakes and waterways in this region for many, many years. Lee, thank you for your contribution, and the podium is yours.
See, we got, is that on full screen?
Yep, that's all up there.
Okay.
So, yep. Oh,
No, it's not.
Okay, sorry. No, I get it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm here. I'll just spend a few minutes talking about the LAPA West organization and a couple of the things that we do. LAPA West was formed. So the topics I'm going to cover are shown here. How and why we were formed, what we've done in the past, what we're doing now, and what our plans are for the future. LAPA West was formed so that we can, as part of the theme for this session, work together, unite, and achieve more together than we could separately to maintain our precious resources, the lakes of Western Mass. So we promote the value and teach each other how to take care of our lakes, provide education to lake owners and managers on how best to do that, and especially learn from each other. Experiences that we have in Pontusic might be similar, might be different to what other lakes have, but I think there's a lot of similarity. We were established in 1999. Initially, Congress of Lakes and Ponds was a lake organization supposed to be statewide. They ended up being pretty much just in the center of the state. And we were part of them, but now we're an independent entity. COLAP dissolved a few years ago, which was too bad. The only good, their treasury reverted us, so we got a couple $1,000s of their money, but we lost some good lake advocates in the center of the state. What do we do? The main thing we do, or have done, is annually and sometimes biannually hold symposia. Usually in the fall, sometimes twice a year. And that's so we can tell each other what we're doing in our lakes, what our problems are, how we solve them. With the onset of COVID, we haven't done any in-person symposia for the last few years, but now we're going to resume that post-COVID. We also do legislative liaison and to inform our legislative delegation what our problems are and what help we need from the state. And we also support programs run by member lakes. One of the primary thing we're doing now is a cyanobacteria program that I'll discuss in some detail. Okay, again, symposia is how we have been communicating with each other, and these are topics that we've addressed in the past symposia. Water quality monitoring, what the objectives are, how you do it. We train volunteers that come to the symposia on what they need to do. I think that's important for all of our lakes to understand what the issues are on the lake. Cyanobacteria is a problem that has surfaced in the last 3-4 years. We have an active program with 10 lakes participating. I'll describe that in more detail in a minute. Macrophyte survey is very important. Fighting invasive weed species is a big issue for most of us, and assessing what the problem is so we know how to address it is addressed with a macrophyte survey. Part of that is identifying the plants. We've run sessions where you can bring the plants from your lake and bring them into the experts, and they'll tell you what you've got, so you can identify them on your own later. We have lots of invasive species. We have 4 weed species that are common in most of our lakes. We also have the threat of zebra mussels that are in Laurel Lake, and a big thrust of the boat ramp monitor program that Jim McGrath is going to describe later is to keep those from populating our other lakes. Shoreline buffer design, boat ramp monitoring, grant programs, lake drawdown while we do it, different methods for controlling weeds. Those are all topics we've addressed in the past, and we plan to plan our future symposia, probably touching on these topics with input from you folks as to what it is you'd like to learn. We can always repeating these topics is probably most of what we'll do, because the problems haven't changed. We just need to learn how the problems are now manifesting themselves, and what the things that we as lake managers can do to address them. One of the programs, the main program that active program that Lapa West is running now is the cyanobacteria monitoring. Shannon Poulin is a recent ecological studies graduate of Westfield State, and she is pretty much the program. Right now, she is visiting 10 lakes. We pay her cost and her expenses out of the Lapa Treasury, and then we get reimbursed by the participating lakes. So it's so it doesn't cost Lapa anything. And what Shannon does with the help from the people from the lakes is do a temp and DO profile, cell count, looking at the extent of any cyanobacteria infestation that you have in the lake. And we visit the lakes every other week during the summer season, when we're liable to have a bloom. The goal of the program is only to understand what the condition of your lake is, and to alert people if they're experiencing conditions that are dangerous to lake users, swimmers. Part of the program is not to treat lakes, just to understand the issues and let the lake associations decide what, if anything, they're going to do to treat them. What have we found? This is a picture taken from my dock of a cyanobacteria scum that we had on Pontusic last year. And that is quite toxic. It has a high levels of toxic cells that you don't want your kids swimming in, and probably yourself shouldn't swim in. And so that's a condition that we don't like to see. This cyanobacteria normally exhibits itself as a contamination throughout the water column, and it gives the water a slightly green tinge, and if you take a transparent container and look closely at what's in the water, you'll see tiny green threads, and that's how the cyanobacteria exists. And so what we had done, focused on until last year, was Shannon, the person running the program, takes the water samples from the different lakes and does a microscopic analysis of the water and does a cell count to determine how many cells per micrograms per liter of the toxic cells there are in your water column. And when the level exceeds 70,000, our state guidelines dictate that we issue a warning to people and warn people that they should stay off the lake. So normally that's been the characteristic of a bloom. But the other thing that the state regulations guidelines give us is look out for a scum, and this is the scum. And last year on Pontusic anyway, we started getting that scum, which would move around the lake, be blown around by the wind. When the picture taken in front of my house was taken in front of my house, it's because we had a south wind and it blew all the stuff up on the North Shore where I live, and so it moves around. That's that's the Pontusic story. Plunkett Lake has also had levels that caused them to close the lake. Hoosick Lake has got some problems now. The Eagle just reported that Stockbridge Bowl is experiencing problems right now. And Stockbridge Bowl, as most of you probably know, had to cancel the marathon 1 year because they had a toxic bloom in the lake, and so they're very susceptible to blooms. So that's a LAPA West program to help us all understand what the risks are in our lake. A lot of you people here are from Onota, and Onota's part of the program. Fortunately, they're in a fairly pristine watershed, and we've never seen anything approaching the levels that cause concern. But many of the lakes, including Richmond Pond, Hoosick Lake, certainly Pontusic, Plunkett Lake, that we do see blooms that should be of concern and can be dangerous. One of the most susceptible lake users to these blooms are your dogs, because they go swimming in the lake, accumulate this stuff on their coats, and then lick it off, and they can accumulate relatively high doses. So it's something we need to be worried about. LAPA, we kind of went dormant in terms of holding symposia during COVID. But now we're going to get going again, have plan to have live annual symposia like we used to. The last few years we did them at Zion Church in Pittsfield. And also when COVID happened, we started doing Zoom symposia. So you could, we offered maybe a lunchtime where we would discuss one or two topics, and interested people could click in and learn something about their lakes. And so we'll probably do both those in the future. So those are our plans. Again, this is Bob Race to help me, got me into this this work. He recruited me to I learned from him from what he was doing on Onota. Encouraged me to do it on Pontusic, and so this is his description of what Lapa West does and should do is communicate with each other, cooperate with each other, collaborate with each other, and together we can make an improvement in our lakes. We've got a lot of good support from people. Berkshire Regional Planning was instrumental in the formation of Lapa West, and Tom and Melissa are still very active. Ken Wagner is always a presenter at our symposia, and he is most of what I know about lake ecology I've learned from Ken. And also our Berkshire legislative delegation is key to what we do. So that's kind of an overview of Lapa West, what we're doing. And Jenny, I guess we'll do questions at the end. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Sorry. It's small. View. Enter full screen. Okay, thank you, Lee. Then our next panelist is Mike Reardon. Mike serves as the director of LOPA and has contributed extensively to the fight against Eurasian milfoil. For information, Mike's background is as a professor of economics. Call it that. Retired. Background, that's background. Emeritus, okay. Engaged in research topics associated with industrial organizations. He's held appointments at many prestigious institutions, including Columbia, UPenn, Stanford, BU, and others. We're fortunate to have Mike and his critical thinking here as part of the panel. So please welcome Mike to the podium.
Hi, my foot's fallen asleep, so if I keep shaking my leg, that's why. So I've been the president of LOPA for about five or 6 years, and it's been a wonderful community of people to work with. We partner with the city basically to try to keep Onota Lake in good shape, and we've it's a challenge, and one of the main challenges is invasive plants, and public enemy number one at Onota, probably in terms of invasive plants, is Eurasian milfoil. So I'm going to tell you about the history of efforts really over the past 25 years to try to deal with this problem and where we are now dealing with it. So what's the problem? So this is the problem as LOPA sees it. This is a policy statement articulated by LOPA about 5 or 6 years ago. So the problem is you need enough vegetation in the lake for a lake to be healthy, for fish to survive and stuff like that. But there's good weeds and bad weeds, and the invasives are bad weeds for lots of reasons. So the goal is to have a sufficient amount of vegetation, but subject to that constraint to try to maximize beneficial native plants, which are adapted to the conditions, and minimize invasive exotic plants, which create negative conditions for the lake. Eurasian milfoil interferes. It's an invasive plant which can basically fill up the lake. It fills up the water column, it grows to the surface, it chokes the lake in shallow areas and interferes with almost every form of recreation in the lake. And it's not good for the ecology of the lake. It sort of crowds out native species. It dumps sediment on the bottom of the lake, which is going to add to the long-term death of the lake, and so on. So it's a really nasty weed. The thing to know about Onota Lake is it's a pretty big lake. It's almost 2 lakes. There's a north basin, which is very shallow. The depth is about 25. LOPA goes out and measures it regularly when they test for water qualities. The depth is about 25 feet. The littoral zone, which is the depth at which plants will grow, is about 15 feet. So that north basin can almost be entirely filled up with plants, and in particular with milfoil. The south is different. It's a deep lake. We measure it at about 65 feet when we go out. Now, if you look at the old maps, they say the maximum depth is 72 feet. And the difference is the junk that's been accumulating at the bottom of the lake it's mainly milfoil. Milfoil was recognized to be a problem in the 1990s. There were some technical reports which listed problematic plants in lakes. They didn't distinguish between natives and non-natives. The early 90s, milfoil was like number 4. By the end of the 90s, it was really recognized to be the main problem. It had become dominant. About when I moved to the area, there was in 1999, there was a lake-wide treatment with an herbicide. In the world of there's 2 types of herbicides. One is called the systemic herbicide. This is a product that kills the entire plant, kills the roots. The other type is a contact herbicide, which just basically knocks it back and weakens the plant, but doesn't necessarily like kill it. So systemic herbicide is sort of the gold standard for getting rid of invasive plants. After the sonar treatment, which did definitely control milfoil for a couple of years, there were lots of different things that were tried to try to manage it going forward. Benthic barriers are basically weed mats on the bottom of the lake. Weevils were sort of critters that were supposed to eat the plants. Divers came in with vacuums trying to suction up the plant. None of this worked too well. In the end, it was all worth trying. It was the early years of this battle with milfoil. Drawdowns were recognized of the lake in the winter, exposed a substantial part of the littoral zone, and with freezing conditions that could kill the plants. So drawdowns were recognized as an effective way to control weeds. And in 2003, for the first time, a contact herbicide, diquat, was used to spot treat for milfoil. In the next 10 years, the middle years of the battle, the city, and with LOPA's support, settled on a strategy of combining 3-foot drawdowns with spot treatments of diquat. And it was recognized as being reasonably effective at controlling the milfoil problem for that period. This is a quote from Bob Race, who basically states that consensus. Bob was the founding director of LOPA. We owe so much to him in terms of taking care of Onota and other lakes in the region, as Lee mentioned. So the lake was treated in early summer with diquat on a pretty limited basis. There were drawdowns in the winter, and this seemed to keep the problem under control. That strategy started to unravel in about 2014, in which regrowth of milfoil in the late summer started to become recognized as a problem. And it was very disruptive for recreational purposes. People complained about it, they didn't like it. And beginning in 2017, there was also a switch from 2 things started to change in 2017, 18, 19, 20. One was that there was an attempt to do deeper drawdowns to expose more of the littoral zone to kill back the weeds. There was an attempt in 2017, which was abandoned because of an early snow or something. And then the next year, there was a controversial 5-foot drawdown, which had an interesting effect. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But also the other thing was they started a second treatment. There was a diquat treatment in early summer and a diquat treatment in later summer. And you'll notice that the amount of acres that needed to be treated with the chemical were increasing over this time, suggesting that the plant was becoming more resistant to the herbicide. When the drawdown was done in 2018, interestingly, it did knock back a lot of the milfoil in that year, the following summer. But another invasive plant, European naiad, came out because the drawdown didn't. Naiad propagates by seed. It didn't kill the seed. The drawdown killed the milfoil, but there was a new plant that became dominant. The following year, after that, there was a reversion to 3-foot drawdowns, and milfoil just roared back. and taking over large areas of the lake. The amount of acreage that was treated in the early treatment and later treatment increased. It really didn't look like this was working. At this point, with LOPA's advocacy in part, the city switched strategies. There was a new systemic herbicide that had come onto the market called Procelacor, which apparently had advantages not only of killing the plant, but it was also highly targeted towards killing milfoil with very little collateral damage to native plants and other native plants in the area. So that Procelacor treatment was conducted in 2021, 2 years ago. It covered a large fraction of the littoral zone, 260 acres, where milfoil was recognized as being moderate and dense. The following year, last year, there was no herbicide treatment at all in the lake. And it, up until like really the fall, there was very, very little milfoil to be found in the lake. And the other thing that was remarkable was that native plants, beneficial native plants, were starting to make a very strong comeback. In the first year, we saw a lot of native naiad, the good naiad, not the invasive naiad, coming back. And this summer, we've seen a lot of a plant called Elodea, which is a low-growing plant on the bottom, which is a pretty healthy plant. So Procelacor apparently provides effective multi-year control of milfoil while encouraging the rebound of beneficial native plants in the lake, meeting those goals. However, at the end of last season, we started to see milfoil reemerging in the North Basin, the shallow North Basin. The city is now in the third year of a 3-year contract of Solitude Lake Management, who is the herbicide applicator. That contract provides some guarantees that milfoil won't become invasive or become a nuisance. There were a limited number of acres that were recognized at the end of last summer as qualifying for the guarantee in the North Basin, and there's going to be a limited treatment of 14 acres of the north of basically the coves at the north of the lake with Procelacor spot treatments. It's planned to occur on Monday morning. But meanwhile, what we're seeing this spring is the milfoil is coming back elsewhere. It's starting to spread southward to Apple Tree Point and beyond. We're still in the third year of the guarantees. He still has a third year of guarantee. The intention is to survey the lake carefully in midsummer or late summer to determine where problem areas are and to retreat those areas under the guarantee. So the verdict is still out on the success of this. There is some success of multi-year control, obviously, and particularly the rebound of the native plants has been very impressive. But the continued effectiveness, the verdict is still out of how much control is gotten from this. So the city's been very aggressive and willing to try new methods, and we'll continue to do that to try to keep the lake clear of weeds. Thank you.
Get there. Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Our next panelist is Mr. James McGrath. Jim serves the city of Pittsfield as the Park, Open Space and Natural Resource Program Director, and he will be speaking about future planning of the lakes and open spaces in Pittsfield in the surrounds. It should be noted that Jim has been serving the city for more than 20 years. And I'd like to personally recognize that tenure, number one. That's wonderful. And number two, recognize his assistance in helping drive this event forward. Jim, you're up.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. Great to be here this afternoon. Everyone is giving a shout out to Bob Race, so I'll do the same. So Bob has been serving as the godfather of Onota Lake for years. Bob taught Lee a lot of what Lee has learned about Pontusic. Bob taught me a lot about lake management. When I was hired by the city, I was hired to run the parks department, and but I stepped into the role as the lake manager. And it's a role that at first I was a little trepid about, but I've really sort of come to love it, really because it's all about community. There's a lot of folks that like Mike and certainly Bob and Lee and others, our state colleagues, that have, there's a real collaborative effort around addressing lake management issues, and it's really been a lot of fun. In 2009, I got a phone call, and I remember exactly where I was. It was a phone call from a colleague who let me know that Laurel Lake down in Lee was experiencing a infestation of zebra mussels, and I remember that at the time because that was sort of a watershed moment in the city and in Lopa. For certain, we were aware of zebra mussels and the impact that zebra mussels have on ecosystems. And I remember thinking at the time, like, everything changes now. What we really need to do is really combat this very aggressive invader from getting into Onota Lake and Pontusic Lake. And really, as part of the city's affiliation with LAPA, was to do everything we could to prevent the spread in all of the Berkshire lakes. The governor's office quickly recognized the magnitude of the Laurel Lake infestation and quickly put together an expert panel of individuals from the state and local lake associations and other experts as part of a task force, the Zebra Mussel Task Force. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that task force, which helped to guide our efforts around the prevention of zebra mussels. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon and exactly what we're doing in the city of Pittsfield. So the state, they titled their efforts around zebra mussel prevention. Their slogan was called "Don't Move a Mussel." So this is the boat ramp at Onota Lake. And really what it comes down to, from my perspective, is, and these are the recommendations that the state put out around how we are to address the potential infestation of zebra mussels in Massachusetts. They talked about enhancing education and outreach, including signage. We talked about mandatory vessel decontamination procedures. There was conversation around enhanced enforcement measures, including this hierarchy of penalties for those that were non-compliant, self-certification, and certainly a boat ramp monitoring program. The city quickly took all of those recommendations, and we sort of what we did at both Onota Lake and Pontusic Lake is we very quickly instituted a program that was encompassing of all of those recommendations. So right at Onota Lake, this really became the last line of defense. Why do we care about zebra mussels? Well, they are not a native species to the United States. They are native to Asia. They got into the United States via the shipping channels, St. Lawrence Seaway into the Great Lakes, and they've spread very quickly throughout the United States. They are knocking on the door of New England. And of course, the only known infestation in Massachusetts is in Laurel Lake and south of Laurel Lake in the Housatonic River. But we have geologic conditions here in the Berkshires which are very ripe for further zebra mussel infestation into our water bodies. So we've been very diligent in the development of a program and the implementation of efforts to keep zebra mussels at bay. And I think we've done a pretty good job. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So signage, signage is always sort of the first and easiest thing one can do around an issue. And of course, we very quickly began to deploy signage at our lakes, and we continue to have signage. But what this graphic represents are some of the signs that have evolved over the years that we've deployed at our boat ramps. And We've also taken some of the national slogans and applied them here in Pittsfield. So this "Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers," that's a slogan that's used across the country, and lake associations are using this all over the place, and it's really sort of a universal theme. Also, this idea of clean, drain and dry, and that's we had installed a billboard along Peck's Road in Pittsfield using that slogan, and simple messaging around "Stop the spread of zebra mussels." So there's been an evolution of signage at our boat ramps. And certainly what we know and understand is that we can't always have staff at our boat ramps, and I'll speak to the staffing that we have at our ramps. We can't always have staff, so we often rely on the signage to convey the messaging to those that are pulling up to our boat ramps early in the morning, late at night. Our boat ramps, by agreement with the state, our boat ramps are open for boating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So in 2009, after the infestation at Laurel Lake happened, the Office of Fishing and Boating Access quickly came to all the boat ramps in Berkshire County and installed these kiosks. And these kiosks were sort of the information display area for those that were visiting the boat ramps. This is where the message would be conveyed around the need to self-certify and make certain that you're practicing clean boating. And it's all developed around your boating history. And we'll talk real quickly about how that happens. But over time, these kiosks, they sort of have served their purpose, and they became, a little bit cluttered over time. And I felt that the messaging was getting a little diluted since 2009. So last year, with the help of a professional graphic designer, we put together these new messaging boards that are now at Onota Lake and Pontusic Lake. And it's really meant to sort of consolidate all of the information that we really want to convey. So right off the bat, it's sort of like, hey, please help protect this water body. There's some narrative around aquatic invasive species and why we care about that. And really the whole idea of what we're trying to do at our boat ramps is make certain that no one is bringing a vessel to the boat ramp that is harboring zebra mussels or any other invasive species. So there's this graphic around, if you're going to clean your boat, how do you clean your boat? What should you be focusing on? And again, that message of clean, drain, dry is very prominent on the signage. And this sort of, I spoke to the national slogan around stopping aquatic hitchhikers. And then in the yellow graphic next to the red box is the statement, "It's the law." So currently in Berkshire County, if you're launching a vessel at any of the state boat ramps, you are required to self-certify that your vessel is free of zebra mussels and that you haven't been in a zebra mussel infested water body. And in that red box, we have these forms, which are the self-certification forms that need to be signed and dated on your windshield in order to comply with the law. We also felt that it was really important to convey the messaging in Spanish. Of course, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking population in the city and a lot of folks visiting our city. So there's a QR code on each of the signs at each of the lakes where folks can get this messaging in Spanish. So this is what the messaging bulletin board looks like at Onota Lake at Burbank Park. That's Anya Doherty. She's one of the boat ramp monitors that we have this summer. She is a returning boat ramp monitor, and she's doing a fantastic job. And in fact, we also have another boat ramp monitor in the room tonight, Brendan Depson. He is one of our another returning monitor. He's an environmental studies student, so we're really pleased that he is with us again this summer. And he and Anya and the other members of the team are very diligent around messaging for clean boating. So, this whole program that we developed, and we started with boat ramp monitors in 2009, we've evolved to the point where we think it is that important to have staffing at Onota Lake and at Pontusic Lake 7 days a week. for as much of the day as we can. So we start monitoring at 7 in the morning and we stop at 7 at night. Currently, with the staffing we have, we're able to cover 70 hours of what is that 84-hour window. It's not inexpensive to run a boat ramp monitoring program. It's over the course of 15 weeks of the summer. It costs us nearly $35,000. We're supplemented by the Commonwealth with $18,000 through a grant from DCR, the Lake and Pond program. But it's the city's obligation to come up with the remainder of that obligation. But again, I think the flip side is if we didn't have monitors at the lake, if the lake were to be infested with zebra mussels, there is an absolute order of magnitude economic impact that we would realize in the city. So we will continue to do the zebra mussel monitoring. And it's really important that, you know, the monitors at the lakes, they not only are interfacing with the boating public and understanding what their boating history has been, but they're also ambassadors for the city and acting as eyes and ears in our parks. One of the most important parts of the program is that it's a lawful attestation that you can certify that your boat is decontaminated. So when boaters sign and date the form, they are doing so under penalties of law, and we really hope that they are truthful around their boating history. This is an example of the log sheet that we've used for the past 14 years at the boat ramps. It's a simple data sheet where we collect the time and date of every single monitor or of every single launch, and we determine what the last water body that they were in and how they potentially decontaminated their boat. We've moved to, with the assistance of the state, we've moved toward a digital data collection. So all of the monitors have or will have iPads. So we're doing this data collection in real time. We also pass out these brochures for folks that maybe are showing up at our ramp and saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is a zebra mussel? So we pass out these brochures so folks understand exactly why we care and what they can do to decontaminate their vessel. And of course, the zebra mussel monitors at the ramps are also well versed in this messaging and can speak, at every level with the boating public around why we care. So we've been doing this for 14 years. I think we've got a nice system down. It's a little bit expensive. It takes time to manage staff and all that comes with that. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important that we're doing this in the city of Pittsfield. If any of you from other lakes in the Berkshires or in other areas, if you want any advice or anything else around how to develop a program, how to staff the program, and any advice around that, I'm happy to be a point of contact. It really is that important. And it's really one more piece of the lake management puzzle that the city can contribute to protect these natural resources. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Oops, thanks, some cards.
Okay, Doug Spohr, is our next panelist. He serves as the Director of Invasive Species at LOPA. Doug has a long history of serving the Berkshire community as a practicing clinician and past department director from the Mickey unit at BMC. In his time with LOPA, Doug dedicates his effort to mitigating the spread of invasive species in our waterways. Thanks, Doug, for your contribution. The podium's yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for, thank you for coming. Aquatic invasive species, AIS. We have plant invasive species that Mike talked about, and we have animal invasive species that Jim talked about. And my remarks are going to capitulate a lot on what Jim has already talked about. I'm going to spend a little time talking about zebra mussels, why we don't want them in our lakes, and some best practices that are about to be implemented, that have been implemented across the country, but are about to be implemented in Berkshire County. And in doing this presentation, there wasn't a ton of collaboration about who was going to be talking about what, but I thought it would be kind of interesting if we did a sort of a historical review of where we are today. So in danger of representing my age, I thought we might sort of climb on to Mr. Peabody and Sherman's Wayback Machine, set the date to the date that Jim talked about, 2009. So we'll set the meter there. We'll climb on board. And when we do, look what it takes us to. It takes us to July 9th, and that's the date that Jim talked about. It was a major headline. Zebra mussels were found in Laurel Lake. It was a major fall off the chair moment for people who were really interested in the preservation and the integrity of our lakes. We shouldn't have been too surprised about that because they were in Lake Champlain as much as 10 years ago. We shouldn't have been too surprised because we knew that they were in Lake George. We shouldn't have been too surprised because we knew that they were contaminating the Hudson River. But a potential disaster was very worrisome among the boating community, especially with Stockbridge Bowl. And there were great pushes at that time to close the ramps. We're going to deny access. Holy moly, what are we going to do about this? There were hot brains going on among many of the lake associations. Tom Flannery put on some scuba gear. He went into Laurel Lake and he came out and he was shaking his head. And he said, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. He believed they might have been in Laurel Lake for as many as 2 years. More boat ramps were pushing to shut down, but the state was saying, wait a minute, hold on. You can't close access to the lakes. Let's begin to develop a way of beginning to how we're going to sort of handle this. But many of the lake associations, especially Stockbridge Bowl, said, no, we don't care what you're interested in. We're terrified that no matter what happens, we're at risk of a catastrophic event here. So there was a chafing and hot brains going on at that time. You can begin to sort of see what those zebra mussels look like and how they begin to attach themselves. Quabbin Reservoir, let's shut down the Quabbin Reservoir. That serves the drinking water for much of Boston. Here's a picture of Jim. Do you recognize yourself? There you are. So the monitoring program began to get its legs underneath it at that time between the state and local associations and leadership like Jim McGrath. But fractures also began to develop because the fishing community thought this wasn't right to begin closing down access. We have our interests. The weather is nice. We want to fish. The boating community, they believed at that time that their perspective was the correct one and were irked that you're closing access to these lakes. And so fractures and fissures began to develop among the community. And I would say that much of that fracturing that went on then has repaired itself, although people believe that their own position is the right position. And sometimes even today, people don't listen as well as they could in terms of trying to understand everybody's point of view. But rifting occurred back in that time. And as Jim mentioned, the state stepped in, bills were introduced, plans were developed, and at that time then in December of 2009, sure enough, zebra mussels were found in the Housatonic River. So back in November of 2009, the state hired a consulting group to say, to take a look at, well, my God, if this is happening in Laurel Lake and this is happening on the Housatonic River, maybe we ought to step back and try to understand where the risk lies among all of Western Massachusetts. And what they did was they stratified these lakes in terms of those with low risk, those of moderate risk, and those of high risk. And I thought it'd be really interesting and important information for you all to know that those risks with high risk are listed there. And so my remarks really are not so much about Onota Lake and Pontusic and Richmond Pond as they are about all of these freshwater, vulnerable bodies of water that we have. They're all very vulnerable to this introduction of what I believe to be probably the most ecologically dangerous organism out there. You've seen this map, and I don't mind showing it again because it's that important. You can sort of see where these colonies have lined up right along the border of New York and Vermont. They're on our doorstep. And frankly, they're just one boat away from having these zebra mussels introduced to Richmond Pond, to Pontusic Lake, to Onota Lake, to the reservoirs, to all of the freshwater ponds and lakes that we just took a look at. A harbinger, maybe not, is that Asian clams were found last year in Lake Onota. We don't know how they got there. They're not native to Onota Lake. We don't know how they got there. We don't know that much about them yet. So we're continuing to sort of study and to take a look at them and try to understand what ecological impact they may have, but it's much too soon to know, and we don't know how they got there. So a quick primer on zebra mussels. You know, they are, as Jim mentioned to you, they are really good hitchhikers. They are very smart, and they have a way of getting themselves attached to trailers, to boats. They are pretty good at adapting to a variety of different environments. They are absolutely prodigious in their reproductive capacities. And what makes them so dangerous is that they filter feed. They feed through filtering out anywhere between a quart or a liter a day. And so they'll filter out all of the nutrients, all the phytoplankton, all the things that other native species rely on for food, including the fish community. So they'll make a body of water really clean, but in so doing, they will kill the lake. Once they've colonized, once they've established themselves in a body of water, it's game over. There is no eradicating the zebra mussels, not at this point. You can treat them like Lake George does. They bring scuba divers in and they can kind of hand pick them, but it's a battle that is not a very effective battle. There are some biopesticides that I've read about that are being treated, I think in Minnesota, but the effectiveness of that right now is to be determined. The education programs that Jim talked about that take place with signage and with interaction with boat stewards is probably, I believe, our greatest asset. It's our greatest strength of being able to mitigate the risk of zebra mussels. But we can't rely on that alone. Have I made you a little anxious yet? If I have, then I've done my job. I mean, that was kind of one of the goals I had of trying to make my remarks to you. So if I've made you a little anxious, that's a good thing. So in terms of next steps in trying to adopt best practices, boat wash stations have been developed over probably the last 10 to 15 years across the country. Boat wash stations are decontamination stations where watercraft and trailers are sprayed down with 140-degree temperature. That's the temperature at which microscopic, we call them veligers, but the microscopic elements of zebra mussels, as well as that temperature being effective for animal invasive species, is determined to be effective. And they are all over the country. And they've been adopted as a national best practice for mitigating the risk of zebra mussels. Laurel Lake established a a boat wash station, probably, Jim, 10 years ago, I don't know. Almost right after the infestation. Stockbridge Bowl, almost immediately after the Laurel Lake infestation, developed a boat wash station. But I have been concerned that we need one that would serve Pontusic Lake, Richmond Pond, and Lake Onota. And I'm pleased to say that in collaboration with the city and Jim's hard work, dollars have been set aside from the Community Preservation Act funding of Pittsfield to establish a boat wash station at Onota Lake. Funding will become available in July, and I'm pleased to say that we'll hopefully have that up and operating in 2024. That boat wash station will be made available for boaters of Pontusic Lake, Richmond Pond, and Lake Onota. The boat stewards will receive specialized training, and those boats that we know through self-certification have visited at-risk waters will have a courtesy decontamination available to them, as well as any stewards that sees some visible means of a boater that may be at risk of introducing invasive species will also be able to have a courtesy decontamination of their watercraft. But my concern lies beyond Lake Onota and Pontusic Lake and Richmond Pond. My concern lies for all of the freshwater bodies in Western Massachusetts. And so your support of our work, either financial or through volunteer efforts or just a kind note, is very much appreciated in developing and making sure that we can develop a comprehensive best practice that could be available for all of the freshwater ponds in Western Massachusetts. Please help keep our lakes where they are. We love them. I got involved in this not because I'm an environmental scientist. I don't have a advanced biology degree. I'm a common man. I live in the southeast part of town. I don't live on the lake, but I'd like these lakes to be available to my children and my grandchildren and to the visitors that come to Berkshire County, and all of your support can help us, I hope, get there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Getting better. Andrew Madden, our next panelist, serves with the Department of Fish and Wildlife as the Western District Supervisor for the state of Massachusetts. Andrew is a biologist and has worked in natural resource conservation in regions across the country for more than 25 years. For the Department of Fish and Wildlife, he is dedicated to habitat maintenance and protection, and we're excited to have him share his perspectives today. Please welcome Andrew Madden.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Thanks, Greg, for putting this together. Thanks for getting my blood pressure going, Doug. Reliving those early days of the zebra mussel. I remember it all too well. Just as background, relative to the zebra mussel discussion, Mass Wildlife's been studying Laurel Lake now for a number of years, doing fish surveys almost annually. We've skipped a few years in between. So we're starting to put together some of that long-term fish data and the effects of zebra mussels. So we hope to have that for you at some point soon. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I think on the brochure, it said that I was going to be discussing lake and pond management from the voice of the sportsman. And I don't want to presume to do that, to speak on behalf of our hunters and anglers in the area. But what I do want to do is talk a little bit about the relationship between hunting, fishing, and lake management. So that's what I'll do here today. For those of you who don't know Mass Wildlife, we're the agency responsible for the conservation of all the freshwater fish and wildlife in the Commonwealth. That includes endangered plants and animals. And we work to restore, protect, and manage land for wildlife to thrive and for people to use. What fish and wildlife management in Massachusetts is done under the North American model for wildlife conservation. This is the most effective wildlife set of principles and policies in the world for managing and restoring and protecting fish and wildlife. And there's a number of components to that model, and three of them I've listed here, which I think are important to our conversations here tonight. One is that wildlife resources are conserved and held in trust for all citizens to enjoy. Every person has equal opportunity under the law to participate in hunting and fishing. And management and conservation of fish and wildlife resources is science-based. Part of the North American model for wildlife conservation includes a funding structure for conservation of fish and wildlife. And hunters and anglers have long carried most of the burden for conservation in Massachusetts and throughout the country. And that happens in a couple different ways, through license sales, hunting and fishing license sales, which goes towards conservation, federal taxes on all hunting and fishing equipment, which then comes back to state governments who manage wildlife populations and conservation, and direct contributions to conservation from hunters and anglers. Removing hunting temporarily from the discussion, anglers alone annually contribute $1.7 billion directly to conservation of fish and wildlife nationwide. So it's a substantial contribution. And fishing is important. We all saw during the COVID pandemic how important it was for people to be outdoors and connect to the outdoors, and the benefits, physical, social, mental, emotional health benefits that come from being outdoors and participating in those activities. And fishing is a great way for people to do that. Anglers also contribute directly to conservation of open space and wildlife habitats. Everybody who buys a fishing license pays $5, a land stamp that goes directly towards buying land and protecting open space for everybody to use. And it's a major economic force. Freshwater anglers expended $30 billion according to the 2016 study, which was the last year that they really had hard numbers on that. I'm sure it's a lot more than that at this point. And that's only from freshwater. In Massachusetts, it's an estimated $454 million spent by over 600,000 anglers while freshwater fishing in Massachusetts. And it's about double that if you include saltwater fishing. So what does all that have to do with lake and pond management, which is what we're talking about here? We did a survey of Massachusetts anglers in 2022, and we found that 82% of our anglers spend most of their time in lake and pond fishing. So when you couple that large portion of the angling public and the economic force that goes along with that, these are really important waters for everybody in this area and throughout the state, but particularly in the Berkshires, I would say. A few other results from those surveys: 74% of people fished in public waters with good shoreline and boat access. And so that reinforces the importance of having access for all to these waterways. A couple other results that I thought were interesting for you: the top reasons why people fish: for relaxation, for the sport, to be with family and friends. Those were the top three responses that we got from that survey. And to reinforce the importance of lakes and ponds, the number 1 and 2 species that are pursued were bass and stock trout, which happen in our lakes and ponds in the area. So stepping away from that survey a little bit, I wanted to talk generally about what's important for anglers and for people who fish. And I would say the number 1 thing is a balanced aquatic community. So what that means is not only good game fish available for recreational fishing, but good trophic stages for all different fish, prey species, good invertebrate populations, healthy vegetative community. All those things contribute. Freshwater mussels, very important. All those things contribute to a good balanced aquatic community, and a good balanced aquatic community means good fishing. Other important things are consistent recruitment of game fish. So recruitment meaning bringing fish into a catchable size. So that requires successful and consistent spawning success. So access to spawning areas, access to rearing areas so fish can grow up to the point where they're part of the recreational fishery, obviously important. For some of our lakes and ponds out here in the Berkshires, cover and habitat are critical parts of what anglers are looking for. The more diverse the habitat and the structure, vegetative or otherwise, the better the community is going to be in terms of fish, invertebrates, and all other things in the lake, the more resilient the community will be to things, perturbations like climate change and other impacts. And so the diversity of habitat is really important. Another thing that I think is maybe not mentioned enough is not only catching fish when you go fishing, that's important, obviously people want to do that, but the fishing experience itself. And so a positive and welcoming experience at our lakes and ponds is really critical so that people have a good day of fishing and feel welcome in those different places. And that means all people from all different backgrounds. And that gets to the point of access too. As I said in our survey, that's one of the major things that people focus on. And I think that's really important that we spend time thinking about access and how people access and who is accessing our lakes and ponds. So how does that relate to fishing and lake management decisions? Well, as I said, all the things that are swimming around in those lakes or crawling or shuffling or doing whatever else they do, those are all part of a public resource. And so alterations to those resources has a big impact on a large segment of the public, including really economically important impacts to many people. And hunters and anglers have long demonstrated that they are the primary supporters of conservation. So it's really important to incorporate those views as we talk about lake management decisions. So I guess my bottom line point would be to encourage anybody here who's a lake manager or lake association, regulatory authority, state agency like us, to better incorporate fishing interests in the decision-making process and bringing those people in. And I think that means actively recruiting some folks from those communities, whether it's the Berkshire County League of Sportsmen, which is the organized sporting community here in our area, or local hunting and fishing clubs, or reaching out to some of those underrepresented communities of anglers and other users of lake and ponds in our area. I think really reaching out and trying to pull those people in is going to be important for as we make decisions on what we're going to do with lake and ponds in the future. And with that, we'll do questions at the end.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's great. Well, if we do this, thank you.
Okay. Our final panelist of the evening is Courtney Morehouse. Courtney serves as a senior planner for the Environment and Energy Program at the Berkshire Regional Planning Committee. Courtney has been doing her part to build healthy communities here in Western Massachusetts for at least the last 5 years. Coming to us from the West Coast, where Courtney developed extensive experience in conservation and restoration projects. Courtney now applies that experience to help the Berkshires address the challenges of climate change while restoring and protecting healthy rivers and landscapes. Please welcome Courtney to the podium.
Thanks, everybody. You stayed. So I'll give you graphics. I'm Courtney Morehouse. I'm with Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, and we work on behalf of the 32 municipalities of the Berkshires to and the environmental team to help them manage the stormwater resources, the lakes, the rivers, as well as energy. So we do many things, but I'm on the energy team, and I'm going to be talking about how we sort of help with stormwater runoff. So it's titled non-point source pollution or runoff. Think stormwater when I say that as we go forward. So I'll start with a little bit of history. Who knows what this is? Go ahead, sir, environmental science major. You should know. Who knows what river this is? Thank you. Yeah, it's the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. This is the 13th time it caught on fire. It was one of the many impetuses for the 1972 Clean Water Act, which was a major overhaul of the Clean Water Act that we still live by today. And the reason it got to this point, as we sort of went over in many of the presentations, is that at the very beginning of our country's founding, we thought of our rivers as a place to make things go away. You know, we thought of them as if you put it in the river, it goes downstream and it's no longer my problem. It's, the neighbor downstream's problem. But that only worked to a point until rivers started catching on fire. So in 1972, bipartisan bill became an act. It was actually a Republican and Democrat came together. The bill was so overwhelmingly popular and bipartisan that Nixon vetoed it when it was brought to his table, and it was overturned by both houses. So it overcame a vast majority of, you think about that today, that seems kind of crazy. So this is Nixon forcing his hand to sign it into law, but no, he aptly supported it at the end. So it's modeled off the Clean Air Act. And what it really did was it did a great job of controlling point source pollution. So when we talk about non-point source pollution, we can't do it without talking about point source pollution. So that is quite literally the reason the Cuyahoga or many of our lakes and rivers set on fire is because there were pipes draining various factories, et cetera, directly into rivers, again, structuring our rivers as the away of our communities. So it did a good job at saying, if you're a factory, you want to dump something into the river, you have to be heavily regulated. We have to test it. We have to make sure it's clean. We have to make sure our rivers are clean. In today's modern world, the biggest point source that would occur in most of our communities is our wastewater treatment plants. So it treats our waters and then it dumps clean, treated water into our rivers. And those are all part of the point source. But it left the problem of non-point source pollution, which the Clean Water Act does an okay job of trying to control. But as I say, and as many people say, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So what is non-point source pollution? It's basically water hitting our landscapes and running off. It comes from no single source into our lakes and rivers. And it is sort of the uphill battle of our time is to figure out how do you take a dispersed pollution and treat it. It no longer is able to be easily treated because you're not able to trace it directly back to, okay, it's that pipe specifically, right? And so each of our landscapes provides a different type of pollutant. Our impervious cover provides petrochemicals from the oil that come off our cars. Agricultural landscapes provide nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen that currently are used to grow food for us, right? So each of these has its own risk associated with it. So what do you do to control 1,000 cuts? You come up with 1,000 solutions. So what this does to our lakes is it sort of speeds up the process of the aging. So all lakes age naturally. And when they go from an oligotrophic, which is a young lake, deep waters, kind of a clean bottom, not a lot of sediment, to mesotrophic and down to eutrophic. So when you hear the word eutrophication, that really is a natural process that is unnaturally hastened with excess nutrients, dying plants, et cetera, the filling of a lake, which can then cause algal blooms and excessive plant growth. So when we're talking about runoff, what we're talking about is the source that causes some of the problems that were covered today, right? Excess nutrients, and in particular, phosphorus, is the limiting factor to plant growth and algal growth. So by limiting phosphorus, we cut off some of the nutrients available to those plants to really thrive. When we provide a lot of phosphorus, we're saying, milfoil, here's the food, here's the light, go at it, right? When we look at how climate change, I hate to bring up the climate change slide, it's always a downer. When we bring up climate change, it just kind of makes everything worse, right? It takes the problems that we already have and it says, okay, so algal blooms, cyanobacteria blooms, they happen later in the summer when the waters are warm. With our warming summers, we're scheduled to see that sooner and sooner in the summer and to see bigger algal blooms. And you can see that it's according to the latest climate change assessment report put together by the state, those summers are getting warmer faster, right? So by 2050, we should have the summertime temperatures of Maryland, by the 2070 North Carolina, and by the end of the century, predicted again, the summers of Georgia. So if we think about how our lakes are going to react, we can think about the warming of those waters in the future as well. And then you also pair that with our region in particular is supposed to experience bigger and more storms. And so that will increase the amount of runoff that we're expected to get. So you can look at the amount of nutrients that we get based on our current storm structure or precipitation and increase it. Especially as we get storms that are bigger, there's going to be a lot more erosion, a lot flashier stream systems that then deposit even more non-point source pollution. So what do we do? There are a lot of solutions that exist. So that is the good news. Everything from mechanical solutions to biological solutions, small solutions and big solutions. And it really will take all of these. So that's why I say if you have 1,000 cuts, these are the 1,000 Band-Aids, right? We can do all of these things and really rethink how we structure our stormwater systems. It is a big task. It is an expensive task, but it is one that ultimately, if we are going to create healthier rivers and lakes, it's one that we have to start embarking on and investing in. So I'll do a little plug for gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure. Where possible, we try to encourage green infrastructure. And as one person at a conference that I was at said, the reason for this, one of the reasons is that gray infrastructure depreciates. As a general rule, it requires maintenance, it requires updates. Whereas green infrastructure that involves natural landscapes, willows, plantings, rocks, things that you would often find and that we're using nature to our benefit appreciates over time. So as these willows grow up, if you take the example of this bank erosion solution, you have this cribbing that was actually in Mount Washington, that little corner of our state, that was built in the 1970s and now needs to be completely replaced. If it gets replaced by a bank of rocks, willows, that sort of thing, those willows only get bigger, they grow their roots into the bank, and it's a long-term solution that doesn't require the same amount of management. The other challenge that we have when it comes to green infrastructure is that there's only so much land around, right? So we need to really take a public and private land approach. We need to look at this as all of our problem and all of our solution. So when we look at specifically Churchill Brook that feeds into Onota, one of the projects that we've been working on with Trout Unlimited is to look at where can we put in places that we can manage some of the floodwaters, some of the green infrastructure along Churchill Brook, and then looked at the ownership of those, where there are large green spaces and which of those properties can we target those landowners and ask them, would you be willing to use some of your land to serve as part of the solution? So I'll give you an example of where we've done this private-public melding. Down in Lake Garfield in Monterey, Massachusetts, we've been working with the town to put in green infrastructure to improve the water quality of Lake Garfield. The project that we got funded through the Clean Water Act Section 319 funding was to do what's called what we're calling a treatment train, which is basically a series of green infrastructure that improves the drainage along this stretch of Hoopi Road along the lake there that ends in a rain garden. So it removes 95% of the sediment and therefore 95% of the phosphorus by actually capturing it and holding it back and treating it. And then in addition to that, in concert with that, we're also targeting private homeowners within the watershed of that lake and giving free stormwater assessments where we go to their property, we talk to them about stormwater, and we point out where can you put rain barrels, rain gardens, infiltration trenches, pervious pavement, and we give them a report that says, here's your long list. Here's all the things you can do on your property. You can choose to do them or not. And then we also have set aside some grant funding for those sort of key demonstration projects that we will implement on specific landowners who are willing to maintain that for the long term. So specifically riparian buffers and rain gardens will say, this looks like a really good example project. Would you be willing to maintain it if we installed it? The other things we're starting to think about is how do we sort of maintain that into the future? How do we encourage people to do it on their own? So some of the programs we're looking at is similar to the Lakewise program up in Vermont, where they provide awards if you do 5 infiltration types projects where you're treating runoff in 5 different ways. You get a little placard that sort of boasts your boasts your contribution to the Lake Garfield. Or to up in Ontario, they also have what's called a rain ready program that provides rebates. So you put in a rain garden, you get $1,000 rebate, much like the Mass Save program, minus the energy bills. So as I say, it's 1,000 cuts, but everyone, the good news is that if that's the case, it's everybody doing a little bit that can contribute to the solution. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Excellent. Not sure how to minimize that, PJ. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that was great. All of those, really, honestly, it's really quite a takeaway. So thanks to the panelists for their contribution to this first annual event. We put quite a bit of information out on the table that I'm sure for some will take some time to distill. But for those in the audience that have questions, please put up your hand, or you can take we can maybe bring the microphone to you, or I don't know if you can make your way over there, Okay, great. And then if there's, I guess, someone online that may have a question, would they ping you or, okay, great. So, got our first question here.
Hi, I'm Danny Farber. I'm from Lennoxdale. I live across the street from the landfill. Basically it's a huge liner, I understand, or a membrane they call it. And they're gonna put all the PCBs inside this landfill instead of moving it far away, which I think was the initial idea. So my question is, I'm a little surprised that it hasn't come up here because we're talking about quality of water, and I think the PCBs are a big deal. So I'm just want to get your opinions on what this whole idea. A lot of people are very angry about it. You know, see them building this landfill every day when I look out, open my door, and it seems a little dystopian. The whole thing seems a little crazy to put all the PCBs from the river a few hundred feet away into the landfill, and that it's being protected by some kind of plastic. So you know more about it than I do. So that's my question. What do you all think about this?
So just quickly, I'll take the first part of the answer. It was a topic that we talked about, but because there's litigation surrounding that, it's difficult for some of the panelists to actually address the questions. I know that it's an issue, and I understand that very, very clearly. If any of the panelists would like to talk about that, they're welcome to. But like I said, because that's in litigation, it's difficult for some people to talk about.
Nobody can talk about it? Okay.
Well, I think, you know, it's a really nuanced conversation around the landfill and the Housatonic River cleanup. You know, and there are other sort of more appropriate forums where I think your questions can be answered by experts. You know, I'm no expert.
I think you're expert enough for this.
Well,
I understand.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of sad. All right.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to get with you afterwards and share with you some of those other resources, because I think there are other professionals that are much more capable of that you can connect with. We can connect you with. You know, I think those up here on this panel really are versed to speak about lake management and the topic areas we spoke to. You know, the river cleanup is a big, complex and very nuanced conversation that you know, I want to make certain that your
Right.
questions are answered.
No, I understand.
There's others
You
that
live
are,
across the street from it, you see it happening, and everybody on your block is
and I'm really sensitive to
very
that.
angry about it, and
Yeah,
you know, Lee is angry about it, and you've got the situation where every town took so much money, and then at the same time, the people that live there are furious about it. The whole thing seems dystopian. So I don't understand, you can't say anything about it, so Thank you
Yeah, it's
very
not that I can't say anything. It's that I don't think I'm versed, you
Right,
know,
right.
as sort of what you're looking for. So I'm going to
All
find
right.
you afterwards and I'll share with you some.
All right.
resources.
Yeah, and again, just to make mention, I did reach out to different people at Lee, to different people at the EPA, and they refused to come to the discussion. So as much as there are people that are angry and upset, absolutely, but it's such a hot button issue that even people involved with the policy with the town did not want to talk about it in this forum.
Thank you.
So I tried. Is there another question in the audience? Yep. And then we'll do one from the group. But if you can speak loud enough, although do we need the?
Mhm.
Okay, I have two questions, but they'll be quick. First is for Courtney. Runoff is a happen. From in Plunkett. And there have been a lot of ticks this year. Y'all, anybody got one? Yeah. And so there's a lot of people spraying and a lot of different types of toxins. There's one in particular that we're getting a lot of commentary about at Ashmere Lake. And I'm curious if you have any experience with the runoff. In my research, it shows that biocline, I think is how you pronounce it, is supposedly affecting fish species. So I don't know if that's an Andrew or Courtney question. Have you heard anything about that? That's my first question. And my second is, we've had our first E. coli closure already at Plunkett. My guess is from the thousands of geese. Or if maybe there's a runoff other issue. I know that when we recently recapped our dam, or I mean our dump, we've had 3 runoff issues from the dump into the lake. And so if you have any resources for how to determine what causes the E. coli outbreak, or if there's an organization that does runoff specifically analysis to determine which of our many waterways that come into Plunkett are the problem areas, that would be helpful.
So the tick, is that what it was, tick?
It's the, yeah.
The insecticide?
Okay, I don't know much about that specific insecticide. I mean, I know that, you know, again, it's sort of one of the issues with runoff. It takes pretty much anything we're putting on our landscapes and also impacting our waterways. I would say there are other ways to manage ticks depending on, you know, the structure of the landscape and all that. Then spraying, keeping lawns short, or shorter, if you will, is a great way to do that. As to the E. coli resources, there is a lake manager studied under and took over for Ken Wagner, who's sort of our, you know, the limnologist that we use throughout, named Hillary Kenyon. And she's been working with different lakes, including Cheshire Reservoir, to do studies such as that, really studying the inflows and figuring out where there are specifically higher pollutant loading. And that way you can sort of target where do you concentrate your funds when it comes to stormwater management, green infrastructure, et cetera. So she can get a little more than just, it's coming from everywhere like I did, and instead say, it's coming from everywhere and it's coming in a higher concentration from here, here, and here. And we suspect that these are sort of the areas you want to put in best management practices. So I'll give you, if you follow up with me afterwards, I'll give you her information. I will say some of the other sort of lake monitoring programs attempt to do that as well. They sort of will monitor at the outlets of streams and places where there's suspected higher pollutant loadings. So that's always helpful to structure your monitoring programs in that way too.
And then E. coli?
Well, can I just add
Yep,
one
sure.
thing about
Yep,
the fish part of it, because you asked that question specifically. I don't know about that. That's something we can look up and talk a little bit about, but you're wise to pay attention to that kind of thing, because those sometimes they can be subtle impacts to different biota in the lake. So it might not result in a bunch of dead fish floating around in the lake, but you might be seeing stressors there as secondary impacts that I think are worth paying attention to. So we should follow up on that.
So there are very large acreage. me and my 20 feet, it's no big deal, right? But like, this is one of the largest things.
That might also be a permitted activity too, within 100 feet. There's a regulated area. So, they may need a permit if they're applying within 100 feet of the edge of the water, the bank.
Looks good. Just follow the instructions on the packet. So we're trying to put the.
Yeah, it's worth following up on.
And just a quick answer address on the E. coli or?
Yeah, E. coli is naturally occurring in most guts. So you're right to think, geese, wildlife. The other area to look at is septic systems. And I don't know the specifics around, but I know that a lot of our lakes started off as camps and septics were sized for a certain level and were grandfathered in. So one of the things you might want to consider is, is their septic system, it's sewer all around. Well, ignore that then. But yeah, but the other sort of, yeah. Can you shoot them? I'll talk about fishing. That's in this department, but I will say, one of the most effective control measures for geese is having a very robust and thick vegetative buffer. Not only is it good for water quality, but geese like to have a clear line of sight to the water where it's safe to flee from danger, as well as access to food, which is your lawns. So the more outreach you do with different owners to really increase that buffer garden and get a lot of thick foliage, not only will it help with the water quality and the runoff by slowing it down, letting it infiltrate, etc., but it'll also deter geese, which has sort of been one of the more effective ways I've seen.
Thank you. Is there a question online too? Okay.
Early goose hunting season.
That's correct. I mean, the way the goose population is managed is through the legal hunting season, which starts early in September and does allow for the take of a number of geese. So it is something to look at and make contact with hunters that can help. If you provide the food for them, though, as Courtney said, the lawns, if you have lawns, you got next to water, you're going to have geese.
Thank you.
Okay, so 2 online questions. First one, which are the lakes being monitored in the cyanobacteria study? And is it possible to request adding another?
Yeah, we're looking for lakes that would like to participate. We have 10 lakes. I can't recite them all. I can't recite them off the top of my head right now. But what lake are you?
It didn't say. It was just an online
Okay.
question.
Yes, we want more lakes to participate.
So should someone contact you?
Yes.
Reach out to Lee.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The second online question was, what direct action can concerned citizens who are already acting in responsible ways do to protect our waters?
I'd say maybe the outreach, like you had just mentioned, to go around to other folks that may not be supporting or maybe have certain behaviors that aren't supporting lake health. So I think outreach is maybe one of the reasonable answers.
Another way is to open your pocketbook. All of these lakes in Western Massachusetts invariably have a lake association. And those lake associations often contribute thousands of dollars to lake management causes and help offset expenses from the municipality. So invariably, lake management is expensive, and oftentimes the municipality can't do it all by itself. So and state resources are thin, and it's very competitive, grants, et cetera. So find a lake association and make a donation.
Yep. I would also say, get involved and pay attention to the process for lake management, the permitting process that goes on. Individual citizens should be paying attention to how lakes are managed and what decisions are being made and participate in that process.
So LOPA and other lake associations are volunteer organizations. So in addition to financial contributions, volunteering time and effort is something we welcome and appreciate. We have teams of people that go out and monitor water quality on a regular basis. We have volunteers that go out and pull water chestnuts from the lake as a way to control invasive species. We have volunteer macrophyte surveys, which are basically censuses of plant populations in the lake. So contact the Lake Association and see where volunteer efforts can help make a difference, in addition to financial contributions. Is time and effort is important.
And to sort of summarize, I would think about responsibility and concern and turn it into a verb. Take it from being a noun and turn it into a verb through any of the other kind of collective efforts that have already been mentioned.
Are there any other questions that people have to ask? All right, yeah, let's do it.
Greg, I just want to thank you. My name's Terry Smith. I'm from within the Department of Fish and Game Office of Fishing and Boating Access. So we are a small group of engineers. And we have 310 public boating facilities in the state. I could give you a presentation at some point if there's another symposium about the dating back and why as a Commonwealth there's the need for public access for navigation and for fishing, but that would go for as long as this lasted, if we get into all the details, and I'm sure the questions. But my question is, and I want to point out, Jim McGrath, I started with, I think I met Jim McGrath in 2005 when I started with the department. Jim's done an excellent job in continuing with the invasive program in Pittsfield. This really, I think everyone highlighted, I can remember where I was exactly in 2009 at Lake Garfield. I think it was the day that Ted Kennedy passed away as a result of the town of Monterey closing down Lake Buell and Lake Garfield, and everyone at the state level trying to work things out so it could reopen to the public. Despite, the same people that are at the town level that were trying to prevent the public from going in, were taking their boats out of Lake Buell and going to Lake George for vacation, and ordering the highway department to move barriers and different things so that they could leave on vacation and then come back 4 or 5 days later. So I have my own perspective on some things that were pointed out tonight, is based upon my own experiences when there wasn't a formal boat ramp monitoring process in place with the cooperation of this organization and with the city of Pittsfield and throughout the Berkshires, and while the studies were being done. Something that I picked up on, and I just want to point that out. I think Doug had pointed out in his presentation an interest to expand the boat ramp monitor or in the boat washing stations. One thing that I have not heard discussed, Stockbridge Bowl, when they built their boat washing station, when you put in a boat washing station, the one at Laurel Lake was designed in a very short term and permitted by our agency, because that's what we do through our land management agreements with cities and towns and on state property. So we designed it for use at that facility. Stockbridge Bowl had received a grant from the state, and that boat ramp washing station was very expensive. Is there anyone here that travels into the Adirondacks and into New York? Okay, if you do, and if you pay attention through the Adirondacks, they have mobile boat washing stations with a geosynthetic capture net. So a boat trailer pulls over and the boat washing stations are mobile. So they can move around from place to place, or they can have more of them at many places as opposed to a fixed structure. Because one of the issues that we have, and why our facility at Laurel Lake, when it was designed, was for when the boat is washed, the runoff goes back and goes through an infiltration. If it goes into an underground storage tank like at Stockbridge Bowl, it's treated as industrial wastewater, and the cost of disposal is extremely high per gallon because it's treated as if you're pumping out catch basins and the oil water separators and stuff. So an infiltration approach is something that's more cost, it's green, it's easy to do, it's easy to design. And that's something, but perhaps this organization, if you have an interest in expanding throughout the Berkshires, you might look at what's being done by the New York DEC in their programs for these more mobile. They're similar to what's at Laurel Lake. And it's a trailer setup with the hot water pressure washers. And invasives is really an educational thing. Everyone pointed fingers at, bass fishermen because they, go from lake to lake. Some of the bass fishing organizations are extremely educated. They have environmental people, they belong to national committees and stuff, but the person that might come for the weekend with their kayak after being at Lake George and come into the lake knows nothing about it. So that's important. But in the future, if there's anything that our agency, or if there's questions that people might have regarding public access or facilities, we cover. My agency has 310 facilities. We range from Williamstown all the way out onto Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and all of the coastal facilities and stuff. We recently worked with Jim, did some improvements at Pontusic Lake. I still got blisters on my hands from finishing concrete there in the winter. We just finished today, Lake Buell's parking lot. That's opened up. We made some improvements in the fall, up to Goose Pond for access conditions and stuff. So Richmond Pond, we've done improvements. So we work closely, but we're just a handful of folks. There's only 7 people in our agency for the 310 facilities. That's why it's important for us to have land management agreements with folks from the town of Cheshire, with the city of Pittsfield, So as we rebuild facilities, we update our management agreements and work with other state agencies. Andrew, we work closely. A lot of public access facilities are built on Mass Wildlife property or DCR property, but we are in the same department, but separate agencies because we have separate and different charges. So I really appreciate Greg's email. I had got it late yesterday afternoon. I was
My last bit of outreach. Yes,
and
that
I was
awesome that you showed up. I appreciate
and I was working in Monterey all day today, and I said I want to stick around from this because I have met people individually but not collaboratively. So
Thank you very much.
Terry, just a quick follow-up. I did meet with your director, Doug Cameron, at the site of our proposed boat wash station, and he has pledged to make available some of his engineers that will work with you, that will work with our hired engineer to make certain we've got the best design possible. We want to make certain that this boat wash station really works and is cost efficient in its design, and that it's as protective of the environment as possible. And your information about the cost for it be classified as industrial wastewater, that is something that may need to have a closer look at, because certainly operationally we're we don't have endless funds to manage the lake or the boat wash station. So we'll look more into that, but I fully expect that the city and the Office of Fishing and Boating Access will have a much more collaborative conversation around this proposed boat wash station.
And Jim's even we text back and forth or talk quite a bit. So it's almost a 20-year relationship that we've had. In Courtney's group here, Lake Buell was a facility where there was stormwater management improvements that we did collaboratively back in 2005. And one of the reasons why I pointed out the disposal of the industrial wastewater is one of the things that was done at Lake Buell was a stormwater runoff improvement. 2005, there was a vortex type pretreatment chambers and deep sump catch basins and stuff. All that stuff is great when it's new and it's put in around lakes. But if the grants run out and the programs run out and the lake associations and the people, whoever's property they're on, don't have the funds to maintain those, that's an issue.
Well, goes back to the gray versus green, right? There
Yeah.
takes some maintenance to do
So
that.
that, so some of the things that come recommended as best management practices, you really have to look at from an engineering standpoint closely, like deep sump catch basins. They don't work too well as infiltrator trenches or different things if you have gravel roads around the lake. And some of the things, and so I know like the water quality inlet, that's at Lakeville over time, the cost to dispose of that, we're talking thousands and thousands of gallons of industrial wastewater to get rid of. And if it's supposed to be done on an annual or a biannual basis, that's a huge expense in a budgetary.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. And,
Thank
we
you.
will have another symposium and we'll
Okay.
have you here because it's obviously you have a whole lot to say,
Thank
but
you.
all right, this is the final question. And then after that, we're gonna close up. Yeah.
My question is, you had to pick a power boat. You see all these people, like, there are a lot of people that have taken kayaks, canoes, rowboats. How do we go about, managing them?
Kayaks and canoes are as vulnerable as any other watercraft for introducing any invasive species. You can wash them down at home. You can wash them down. You can use a diluted bleach solution. I think we're looking for how much time between being in a known risk body of water and then going into another lake. Is it 30 days?
Varies with the time of the year.
Hmm?
Varies with the time of the year.
Varies with the time of year.
If you're just simply draining and drying your vessel, yeah.
30 days. If you've been in a known body of water,
I don't think it's that long.
you don't think it's that long. All right.
But you should take a look at the clean, drain, dry protocols, which are pretty clear on what you need to do. And it applies to kayaks and rowboats and small vessels too. They're easier to clean.
Take one of these,
Yes.
take one of these. This has all the information you're gonna need. I'll make sure you have that before you walk out.
So I'll just say at this point that I really appreciate the attendance and that we can spend a few extra minutes if you want talking independently or as a group here. But as far as the panel is concerned, I'm happy to really have had all of your participation. I think this was really, really productive and gives us a great launching pad going into this summer for sure and into 2024. So thank you very much, folks.
Yeah. So this is the self-certification that you'll find at the facility. And this gentleman was asking about decontamination. Talks about how to all the